You stopped by our friends in Dyersville there today.
Yeah.
I heard. I guess tell me a little bit about your visit, and also, do you think the end is in sight for some of their RFS flight?
The end in sight for what?
Their renewable fuel credit.
No, I think it's just beginning. I think we should be talking about cellulosics. I think we have to move to a whole new breed of ethanol type products. I think we can get there. My proposal to get us down to net zero emissions calls for us to invest $400 billion to go out and invest in alternatives, significant alternatives. Now, it makes sense in the near term because on balance, you end up trading off less environmental damage than you do if you did not have it, and it employs a lot of people. But I talked to them about what's next, how's it work. In the meantime, this president has backed off, the commitments he made. He's yielding to big oil, and it's causing some real impact. You'd know more than I would about the detail in the state, but it's also caused impact in the state of people shutting down. And the positive thing is these are good paying jobs. Excuse me, and they keep corn growers in business when this ridiculous war he has going on with China, in a trade war, when we're arguing about the wrong thing. We should be arguing about their stealing intellectual property and not the fact that we have a market to sell corn. And so so that's what we talked about. I was impressed with the operation. It was, as you know better than I do, it's significant, it's large, it has real consequence, but I view it as a transition to getting to the place where we're heading to net zero emissions.
Right. You touched on this, but ag's a big part of our economy, obviously, but it's also a big contributor to our emissions. It's a big contributor to our nutrient runoff into the Mississippi River.
Yeah.
How do you balance those?
Well, the way you balance it is we have the same problem in Delaware. We have a gigantic poultry industry, and the runoff from poultry manure is significant into the Chesapeake Bay and all those areas. So what we're doing is we're trying to figure out how to essentially turn it into pellets and be able to capture it, not have it sit on the ground, not have it be there exposed to the rain and all the runoff. And I think that has to happen. But one of the things we should be doing, we should turn agriculture into the first net zero emitter by using the soil, using products that in fact absorb carbon from the air. And that's what I talk about in my plan. And I think American agriculture should be the first zero emitter of carbon in America. And it's possible to do that and create jobs at the same time. And so, but this is a process of this transition that has to take place. But there has to be some hard rules laid down in this decade so that by 2030 we're well along the way in terms of transportation, in terms of energy, in terms of wind, in terms of solar, in terms of a whole range of alternatives that allow us, just for example, the standards we set for buildings that we should be providing. It would also help people with housing if you were able to continue to have what we propose and I propose, and the President and I have tax credits for insulating homes, tax credits for making all businesses, all buildings, energy contained, et cetera. So there's a lot of things we can do, and including investing in infrastructure in a way that I propose we have 500,000 recharging stations on all our highways and every new building, every new highway that's built, rural as well as national. We can afford to do that. We can do that. It's within our budget to do it.
Great. And I know you also stopped by a convent today.
Yeah.
The Catholic faith is very important historically and currently to the Dubuque area. But I think folks might be interested to know how your faith and how that influences your policy and when policy has to.
Well,
depart.
I think. Look, my faith and my politics coincide because they're both based on the abuse of power preventing the abuse of power, as well as making sure that we're in a situation where we treat everyone with dignity and honor, and and we basically have to restore the soul of this country. I'm not proselytizing. I feel, for me, my faith has gotten me through some tough things. Other people have other means by which to do it. There's that great quote from Kierkegaard. He says, "Faith sees best in the dark." And for me, my religion is totally private. I don't impose my views on anybody else's, but there's a basic thrust that runs through all the great confessional faiths, that you're an obligation beyond yourself. My father taught me that everyone's entitled to be treated with dignity, not a joke. No one should be left behind. We have an obligation beyond our own self-interest. That's totally consistent with Christian faith, with the Jewish faith, with Muslim faith. And so, to me, it is totally consistent without getting into the detail of what doctrine each faith may have. It's all the confessional faiths talk about the need, you have an obligation to other people. What you do unto the least of my brethren, you do unto me. And to me, that's where it all coincides.
On a larger scale, I guess, folks in rural Iowa, folks in, former industrial strongholds like the city of Dubuque, have had troubles for a long time. They didn't start with Donald Trump's election. So a lot of people here haven't bounced back from the recession. I guess aside from reversing some of the Trump administration's decisions and actions, what do you do that wasn't working in the past 3 presidential elections?
Well, look, what happened in the last election, my mother used to have an expression. She said, the greatest gift God gave mankind was the ability to forget. She said, if that didn't exist, women would only have 1 child, she'd joke. The fact of the matter is, we've all fortunately forgotten what President Obama and I inherited, what he inherited. We were on the verge of an actual depression. We had the greatest recession, finance recession in the history of America, short of a depression. And it took us a long time to get us out of that recession, to get the car out of the ditch, on the road, the engine functioning and starting to gain some speed. And we left office before we could get it all finished. And so there's an article out there that one of the conservative publications ran and said, Trump has the 100th month of economic recovery. Well, 90 of those occurred in our administration. And so what we should be doing is we should be investing in the middle class. They are the backbone of the country. This tax policy that exists today is totally irrational, the way we have it. It's not about doing a wealth tax, it's about fundamentally changing the tax code. There used to be a basic bargain. If you contributed to the well-being of the operation you work with, you got to share in the benefits. That's changed in corporate America. Now they think they only have one obligation, to their shareholders. They bought back $1 trillion worth of the stock. They've adopted Milton Friedman's notion. The only obligation you have is the stockholders. It's not true. It's not true. And corporate America is beginning to figure it out because it's all short term now. If you notice, they're not reinvesting in their employees. They're not reinvesting in markets. They're not expanding because it's all short termism. That's got to change. In addition to that, we have to move in a direction where we provide for the things that matter. My dad had an expression. He said, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. How can you have dignity if you can't afford health insurance for your kid because they have a pre-existing condition? How can you maintain your dignity when you can't? Everybody knows 12 years of education is not enough. You have to start before kindergarten, and you have to be able to pay for and understand how you can get to something beyond high school. And so that's where we should be spending the money. We should be taking back those tax cuts from the very wealthy, giving a greater tax cut to the middle class, and focusing on the things that will rebuild and generate growth. And one of the things we talked before about the environment, my environmental plan by experts points out will create 10 million new good-paying jobs, not $15 an hour, $45 an hour. We can become the next exporter of all the technology that deals with climate change. And so there's so many opportunities we have, but we're not focusing on the right things.